Whether you're watching a movie or going out for a night at the theater, you can't help but notice the production of these performances. But sometimes the audience forgets to notice the most simple of design elements such as clothing. My name is Caleb, and we're going to chat about one of my favorite elements of productions, which is costuming. Before we get into the nitty-gritty details, maybe it would be helpful to first establish the conditions of costuming. What is costuming in the first place? Well, costuming is the use of clothing to provide context and help establish characters within a performing arts production. Costuming is one of the principal groups of design elements present in the performing arts, with others being directing, set, sound, lighting, etc., etc. Arguably, it's one of the most important design elements in any art form, because it can insinuate more about the world around the characters, and even the characters themselves. Depending on the style and the material of the clothing, costumes can express social status, historical period, season, time of day, emotions of characters, alternative societies, and geographic location. Any slight incongruity of the clothing can throw off a production and causes viewers to misconstrue the overarching themes, or it can even cause historical inaccuracies. One thing to note, costuming differs across mediums. For instance, film requires small and refined details in the clothing due to the close-ups and the preservation of film across generations. These garments are also typically finished pieces, which means they are ready to wear for an extended period of time. In theater, the stage can sometimes be 5, 10, 50, or even 100 feet away. These garments don't necessarily depend on the intricate details because the audience won't be able to notice. Since theater has limited production times, most garments might be unfinished inside unless there is a costume change on stage, where the inside of the garment is visible. Now, these aren't always true because it depends on the theater and the run of the show. In the overarching process of design and implementation of costuming in theater, it all begins with a costume designer. So, what does a costume designer do? In short, they visualize the production in terms of clothing, but it doesn't happen instantaneously. It's a process. There are 5 primary steps: analysis, collaboration, research, preliminary sketching, and final sketches. Analysis is the first step, where the costume designer reads through the script while considering the themes and the personalities of the characters. This step is crucial to the next step as it helps develop motifs to be carried throughout the production. Having a clear understanding of the script and plot takes us to the next step, collaboration. This part is essential at the beginning of production as well as throughout the entire production. For collaboration, the design team meets with the director to discuss vision. What time period? Is there a certain style? What themes will this production build upon in the script? This is a point where the designer and director can share and explain motifs to reach a compromise. Just because a production is set in 1940s World War II doesn't mean it can't be an agreement to transform the time period into a modernized version about wars in the Middle East. That's the beauty of collaboration. It gives the artist a chance to explore and make statements about the world around them. Following the meeting with the director, it's important that the costume designer and other designers communicate to create a cohesive overall design. For instance, the costume designer may reach out to the set and scenic designer to discuss color palettes and to confirm that the costumes do or do not clash with the world around them. Then begins the research. Research is the use of pictures, paintings, news, videos, or text to influence the clothing of each character. The designer researches following the conclusion of all the meetings, but sometimes research can also occur prior to the meeting with the director to flesh out a vision. Once the research is compiled, that's when the preliminary sketches are made. Preliminary sketches are similar to word vomit. It gives the designer a chance to throw sketches on a piece of paper and receive feedback. The director glances at this and confirms that the designer is on the right track. Following this, it's crucial that the design team is on the right track once final sketches are made. Final sketches are typically the last step in the design process, and it really dictates form and possibly color. Form is the overall look of the costume and how the fabric sits on the actor. The final sketches are where the designer's personal style is introduced while melding with the concepts of the production. This is also a chance for the designer to explore themes through costuming like texture, color, or prints. If you look at these costume designs by Oana Botez, you can see her style as an artist across shows. For instance, this show, Bull in a China Shop premiered at Lincoln Center, and it is influenced by the Edwardian time period of the early 1900s and the suffragette movement. If you notice, colors are a huge theme in this production, as the characters for President Woolley and Miss Marks are stylized in a stark blue versus red. In this show, the women of Padilla, the characters are of Mexican heritage, and Awana wanted to express vibrancy using print fabrics. There is also a period of mourning, so on stage you can see the stark difference of these eye-catching fabrics against the black mourning garments. So how do you bring these designs to life? There are 4 main ways to do this, and it honestly depends on the specificity of the designer and the show. The 4 ways are pulling, renting, shopping, and building. First and foremost, the designer must save money, especially if you have a tight budget. So if the production is at a theater with a stock of costumes, it is best to first look at what's available. The act of grabbing things from the costume stock of a theater is commonly referred to as pulling. Typically, pulling isn't done by the designer, but instead by the costume shop manager or others within the costume shop. If no one holds these titles, it's up to the designer. Renting is also a commonly used way of pulling garments from a pre-existing stock. There are many outlets to do so in New York City. One of the largest rental warehouses is the TDF Costume Collection. It is located at Kaufman Studios in Astoria. While it is a larger collection, sometimes the designer must sacrifice specific style of their designs to work with these costumes. If the designer is working on a historical show, it might also make sense for the designer to shop items. This just means going online shopping or going into vintage stores for time period pieces. This, however, won't work for every historical period. For instance, you can't walk into a vintage store and find clothing from the mid-1800s. If you do, you are phenomenally lucky. But most of the time, you can only find items that date back up to the early 1900s. If a designer is absolutely particular about their designs, it is best to build the costumes. Building costumes is an insanely fun process. After the final sketches, the designer and assistant head to a fabric store to find fabrics that will work with the form of the build. The garment district is full of many shops that specialize in particular fabrics from spandex to silk. By far, my favorite stores are New York Elegant Fabrics and Mood Fabrics. The latter, Mood Fabrics, has been featured on Project Runway as the place to shop for fabric. When there, the designer first looks at material they want, colors, and print. Once the designer sees a fabric they love, they then swatch it, which means that they take a piece and keep it as a reference. After a collection of swatches are taken, they are shown to the director for agreement. Once the agreement has been made, the designer can then order the fabric. These are some of the fabrics from the show The Women of Padilla. If you remember from earlier, this show relies on the vibrancy of print and the stark differences between these prints. In order to cut the fabric, the designer must know how many yards it might take to create their designs. At this point, it is best to meet with a tailor or a draper. Drapers and tailors are individuals that can take a design and create a pattern using the measurements of the actor to adequately fit the individual. The first step in their process is to create a mock-up out of a cheap cotton material called muslin. These mock-ups are used to express the form and fit of the garment. These are typically made before using the fabrics that were agreed upon by the director and designer. Mock-ups are used during first fittings with the actors just to see if the draper needs to make alterations with the pattern prior to cutting the actual fabric. By then, the designer knows how many yards of fabric are necessary to create the designs and can pass along the material to the draper. Once the draper finishes, final fittings are scheduled with the garments and the actual fabrics just to see if minor alterations are need to be made. If no alterations are need to be made and the director loves them, the garments are ready to be put on stage and paired with the set, lighting, projections, and all other elements used in the world of theater. Thank you for listening, and I hope the next time you go watch a production, you notice the most simplest of design elements, like costuming.